Yo. Now we get to the the Cosby the Cosby paradox, as I often refer to it. Thank you to everybody. None of you called me an asshole for subjecting you to watch Bill Cosby. But the Cosby paradox is, I want to say it's interesting. It's complicated, I guess. But there's, there's obviously there's two Cosbys, and this isn't just the case for Cosby, but it's the most stark case of it. Like for me, like I grew up with Bill Cosby, and his TV show transcended all of his other work. He had a sitcom in the '80s that was revolutionary and just crazy good. Like everybody watched it, not just Black America. Everybody watched it. He was America's dad. Like there, you could probably look up articles from the '80s where he was referred to as that. So for me, he's this brilliant comedian, entertainer, you know, TV star, movie star. And that can't be understated. Like how famous he was. He had tons of endorsement deals back when that, wasn't like what it is today for sure. Um, but he was really the first mainstream African American star. And I mentioned him before in the prior video, right? Prior, when it was coming up, was like Cosby was the guy. And then inevitably, you know, that gets complicated. Like, do I want to be that guy? Um, so the Cosby that I know, America's dad, like this, you know, really a uh, an emblem for uh, Black America, just for humanity, honestly. Um, and the Cosby that you know growing up is just this old, like, this old creepy convict, basically. Um, and that's quite, that's quite a jump, right? Um, so it's you guys, those of you who commented, hopefully everybody who watched, you were able to make that distinction, separate um, the art from the artist, as I mentioned before. Um, that's not always easy to do. Some people can't do it, and I don't hold that against you in any way, against them in any way. So it's just it's really like it arguably all the news about Cosby and his debauchery hit me harder. Like, wait, that guy? You know, it's sort of really devastating for a generation that grew up sort of really, you know, idolizing him. And and that's the thing is like I don't want to use right or wrong here, but we idolized him for the right reasons, and then turns out he was a piece of shit. So it's really, you know, it's really a gut punch when you find that out. But as I mentioned in the intro to the Cosby video, I feel like in this context of talking about comedy, we have to talk about Cosby. He was very influential, and the idea that ignoring his work because of his deeds is no better than ignoring his deeds because of his work or his fame, right? Which we have done. We have done with a lot of celebrities. Like Michael Jackson's a perfect example. Like he's pretty much a pedophile, but oh man, his music's. Some people are like, it's just really good music. Like we did that with R. Kelly for a long time. Like, you know, there's a level of fame where some people will look the other way, and so to do it, you know, that I think that's unfair. So to it's unfair to say because he did these horrible things, he didn't contribute. We have to ignore everything that he contributed positively, right? Um, so let's to focus on that. Um, so really, what he did was, and Tyler touched on it in his comment. The biggest thing he did, and it wasn't just in the stand up, but you see it here in the stand up. Um, it was he had a way bigger opportunity to do it with his TV show. It reached a much larger audience. So I did fail to mention this about Live at the Sunset Strip too. Like this performance, Bill Cosby himself was released in movie theaters. Like that used to be how you got stand up. If you weren't going to see him live, right, at a club or at a theater or whatever, like they shot, you know how people shoot specials for Netflix now and you just watch it whenever the fuck you want. No, these came out as feature films. So like they're usually like an hour and a half long. And himself was that. Sunset Strip was a theatrical release. And it kind of went that way for the big comedians, at least, up through, I don't know about the into the 80s for sure. Because Eddie Murphy, we're going to do Eddie Murphy. Eddie Murphy Raw was released as a feature film. So that's always interesting to me. Um, but what Cosby did, and like I said, Tyler points it out in his comment. Well done, by the way. Um, he doesn't talk about race, like, which is if you think about it, like think of every African American comedian you know, right? Even prior to Cosby, like they it's a it's a focal point, right? Talking about being black, talking about that experience, and talking about all these kinds of things. Um, Cosby never mentions it, right? And that's a thread that it it was a building block for his whole brand, I guess. Um, was I don't need to talk about it. I'm black. Like it's very obvious, right? Um, so in effect, he's always talking about race, and when you start to look at it that way, like Tyler was like, he never mentions being black or talks about race, but like once you sort of you you sort of push through that and realize no, everything he says is talking about race, you start to see his intent and what drove him in um, in all of uh, his entertainment endeavors, because that's um, you guys brought up a lot of you brought up the storytelling, right? This is a more contemporary um, version of stand up, is sort of ahead of its time, right? These really long stories. Like he's just a funny guy telling these, pretty regular stories, but he makes them funny with his body language and his facial expressions and his cadence and tone of voice and all those kinds of things. It's like, yeah, Forrest and Ryan and Derek and Matthew all mentioned this, the storytelling part, like, um, that it's not jokey, as it were, right? That's kind of a that's a newer development, um, in stand up. But those stories that he tells in himself were the building blocks for basically the Cosby Show, which again was as big a TV show as there ever has been. So like, if you watch like the first season of the Cosby Show, it's literal bits from his himself stand up put into episode form, like building episodes around these stories and these bits. Um, but back to the race thing, he doesn't talk about race. He doesn't wear it on his sleeve. And when you start to watch him, realizing that he he he's it's not his crutch. He's not leaning on it, on being black to be his appeal. It's being human. You realize what he's trying to do. And what I think he did successfully, whether people know it or not, his overall goal with his stand up and his TV show specifically was to put an image of black America, to redefine black America. That's how I'm going to say it. Redefine black America. Because what does he look at in this special alone, right? He's got like a tweed jacket, right? He's got a suit on. Okay, it's not red like Richard Pryor's. It's not leather, as you'll see, like many black comedians wear in going forward from here. Suit and tie, right? He doesn't use slang. He doesn't curse, right? He talks a lot about his education, his wife's education, his kids' education, right? He talks about family, the family unit, and everything he's saying, without saying it, you have to sort of be connecting dots and looking between the lines. Is he's like, the stereotype of black America, even especially then, early 80s, was, stuff that still lingers today. That black men specifically, right? They run out on their families, they're uneducated, they're thugs, they're, right, all of those things. So Cosby's like, we have to stop perpetuating that stereotype. And he looked across the landscape and was like, where is the positive black male role model who doesn't reward or lionize, gang culture or guns and violence and sex and life on the streets, right? Who demands more from his community. And you look at Cosby, everything he did had that underlying subtext. So when you realize he doesn't talk about race, he figured out right away, everything I say is going to be looked at with a racial slant because I'm black. So if I lean into blackness as it is defined typically by white America or by American culture, I'm not going to be taken seriously. I'm not going to be, I'm not going to make a difference, right? It'll give people more of a reason to continue to live that way instead of setting a higher standard of education and occupation and economy and economics and all of those kinds of things. And one of his theories was, our community, the black community, is starting to believe the lie, right? Believe the stereotype, like, oh, all I can ever be is an athlete or a rapper or a drug dealer. Like, that became this narrative that, obviously, like, white America believed, but when, black America starts to believe it and just sort of succumb to it, like, we're in trouble. And Cosby was this sort of beacon of, hey, there's another way, right? And here's how you achieve it through, going to school, getting good grades, getting a job, building a strong family, like all those kinds of things. So that's the big takeaway from Cosby is he was trying to not just redefine Black America, but like hold it to a higher standard. Now, you can argue, and this is what would happen if the Cosby Show came out today. And he ran into this as his career went on. He clashed with, the emergence of, rap culture and like even through the 90s, like with NWA and that sort of turn to like gangster rap or whatever you want to call it. And all those kinds of things. He clashed with that as he was this icon, but these, there are all these celebrities and people getting famous off of being thugs and, thug life, whatever you want to call it. There's a famous interaction he has at like an MTV bullshit awards, whatever it was. And like Wanda Sykes comes down. She's like interviewing people in the crowd and she asks him a question. He's like, she uses slang terms or something. He's like, speak English when you talk to me or something like. So yeah, literally. And it was like, yeah, so he saw a lot of what we would term as black culture as cop out or sort of, demeaning to black Americans. And he fought against that at every turn. So like that's the big thing. His TV show is the same. Now, this is what happened with his TV show and a lot of his career, but this TV show most sort of pointedly, critics when it came out were like, yeah, it's great and everything, but he's just trying to make a black family white. If that makes any sense. That's horrible. It's like the most racist thing you've heard in a while, right? That mostly white critics are like, oh, he's just making a black family white, which just, again, in the 80s was like, that's impossible. That a black guy could be a doctor and his wife could be a lawyer and that they could have 5 kids and they could live in this brownstone in Brooklyn and that their kids could go to Princeton and all of that kind of stuff, right? Like that's like as if success was an exclusively white attribute, right? Only white people can be successful in this traditional way. I'm doing a lot of air quotes today, sorry about that. And he fought against that, right? And like it's just so ignorant even to say that. Like, oh, he's just making a black family white. But then they would, as the show went on and was hugely popular, the criticism became, well, he doesn't address the concerns of the African American community, right? By not talking about race the way, like I said, like on the surface, hey, he doesn't talk about race. But he did talk about the concerns of, he talked about education a lot. He had tons of iconic black leaders on the show, civil rights leaders, entertainers, athletes on the show as guests. Um, the the set was uh, focused on African American art and music and all these kinds of things like that. Again, they weren't just like, oh, this is the episode about race, like sitcoms would love to do. Every single one was this sort of this uplifting of their culture and their community. And your typical white TV critic isn't going to see that, but hopefully a lot of viewers saw that. It was like, oh, this is different than what I've been sort of spoon-fed my whole life, right? Black Americans can be successful and they can get a good education and they can, sort of, yeah, just be different than, again, what I've been told they are. And that's the biggest legacy that he leaves, was like, there's more than one way to be black, right? Um, so yeah, I pretty much covered everybody's comments, right? I appreciate Shruti brought up the, having to get past the stigma of Cosby, right? To watch it and sort of, yeah, I know it's hard to separate, but when you think about everything that, again, once you push through that membrane of he doesn't talk about race and realize everything he says is about race, right? Just not overtly. All of his opinions are black opinions, right? Um, it's, I think it opens up um, a lot of of value, and he was misunderstood. I think the world could be separated into two groups: the people who got it and the people who didn't. And I don't know that I got it at the time, but over years of studying and watching him and realizing, again, he's this. I mean, there's all these black comedians, and he's over here. He's totally different, you know, than all of the others. And I think he saw it as his duty um, to be like, no, there's more than one path here. And in fact, in the pilot episode, which is how obtuse or dense you had to be watching the Cosby Show and not think it was about, sort of, like I said, elevating the community. There's a scene between him and his son, and his son doesn't want to try in school, just wants to get a regular job, working at a gas station or whatever. It's like, well, you're a doctor and mom's a lawyer. Like, what if I just want to be a regular person? And Cosby's like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Like, literally, like, this is not even a veiled metaphor for all of this stuff that I've been talking about. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You just don't want to try. Like, I don't care what you become, but you're not going to just settle for being a regular person, right? You're going to try, you're going to bust your ass at school, and you're going to take, you're going to work hard to be something better than that, right? You're not going to resign yourself to the generally negative stereotypes of our community. We're going to change that. So that's my Cosby thing. And, I talk about his TV show as an extension of himself, of this stand-up performance, because that's where I think the germ of this idea and this quest began for him, was that special. And he turned it into the show and this sort of this cultural touchstone, not just for his community, but for the culture at large. So there's that. Keep watching these videos. Keep watching content. Keep commenting, and it's fun, right? I think it's fun.